The Canadian Grand Prix has once again cast a shadow over the FIA's inconsistencies, sparking even more furious reactions across social media platforms. At this point, the governing body faces accusations of prejudiced race management, favoring British drivers. But what evidence have we managed to extract from the Canadian Grand Prix? And more crucially, what does the overwhelmingly realistic scenario look like for drivers without British citizenship? It appears we're unable to experience a trouble-free weekend without the FIA's inconsistencies dominating the conversation. Throughout the entire Canadian Grand Prix weekend, we witnessed countless inconsistencies from every angle concerning various incidents. Spectators remained stunned about which situation was more bewildering, but we'll allow you to make that determination since we plan to examine all of them in this video. Above all else, one of the most divisive subjects from the previous year that carried over into this season involved the profanity incidents, which resulted in Verstappen receiving community service last year, despite drivers expressing tremendous frustration with this FIA ruling. Russell and Wolff firmly supported this stance, arguing that drivers must act as positive influences and consequently monitor their language choices. Now, let's examine this excerpt from Russell during the post-race media session in Canada and form our own judgment.
Yeah, saying that you would if you won.
Yeah, they took it on the push.
So utilizing profanity while displaying a broad grin across your face surely qualifies as exemplary behavior for young audiences everywhere, correct? And I'm not even criticizing Russell personally. These are mature adults participating in an extremely competitive sport where every misstep carries significant consequences, yet to remain seated after the race concludes and employ inappropriate language while demanding that rivals avoid similar behavior because you're all supposed to be role models. Excuse me, but that represents peak bias. Moreover, the FIA's ruling proved even more puzzling. They imposed 0 penalties on Russell whatsoever. The British driver managed to escape this situation in the post-race media area without receiving any official warning, strengthening arguments that the FIA demonstrates genuine partiality when deciding against their own people, specifically British competitors in this instance. This merely represents the beginning. We shouldn't overlook that Russell also succeeded in avoiding consequences for unnecessarily sluggish driving behind the safety car, which involved aggressive braking to observe Verstappen positioned ahead of him momentarily. Through this tactic, Russell anticipated potentially securing a penalty against his rival. However, his detailed explanation regarding his actions persuaded the FIA that no concerns existed. Although the officials acknowledged Russell's braking action was largely unnecessary at that moment, they determined it posed no danger to anyone and didn't constitute reckless driving, as Red Bull argued. Expanding on this matter extensively, the FIA stated, "We acknowledge the explanation provided by the driver of car 63 regarding this incident and remain convinced that the driver of car 63 didn't operate erratically through his braking location or intensity. We don't believe that merely informing his team about car 1's overtaking maneuver constituted unsporting behavior. Despite the protest not claiming this, we're equally convinced that his braking timing, location, and intensity didn't represent unsporting conduct. Based on Lambiese's account, George initially attempted the correct approach, accelerating the safety car, exactly what Max was also attempting. But conversely, the Dutch driver felt extremely puzzled about his competitor's sudden braking decision, which Lambiese, Max's race engineer, described as an obvious strategic attempt. Expanding on this situation, Verstappen explained, "I believe we both wanted the safety car to increase speed since it was traveling at merely 120 kilometers per hour, though perhaps it maintained that pace to provide additional time for possibly completing a racing lap. George was attempting to close the gap to the safety car while I pursued the same goal. After he tried approaching the safety car, he withdrew and created some confusion." We must remember the Singapore 2022 incident involving Pérez, who controlled the field behind the safety car. The Mexican competitor failed to maintain the required 10-car spacing and received a 5-second time penalty added to his final result. Clearly, Red Bull thought similar logic should apply here, explaining their official complaint against Russell since his irregular driving only increased penalty possibilities. Yet this failed to capture the steward's attention, who seemed focused on distributing 5-second penalties to withdrawn drivers. This represented the second violation that Formula One enthusiasts cannot comprehend. Norris received classification as a driver, finishing 4 laps behind the race leader following his withdrawal, prompting the FIA to assign him a 5-second penalty for the collision he initiated. Indeed, he bore responsibility for the incident. Fortunately, Piastri managed to prevent more serious consequences, but this doesn't justify the FIA compromising their regulations simply because we're discussing teammates. Common opinion suggests that any Norris penalty should impact future competitions, including super license penalty points or possibly a grid position reduction for Austria. Yet the FIA apparently believes issuing a 5-second penalty to a withdrawn driver adequately fulfills their obligations. Allow me to present something that might frustrate you somewhat, representing this sport's harsh reality. Norris remains the sole grid driver without any super license penalty points. I'm uncertain how the FIA will address these bias allegations, but from this perspective, they appear to be creating their own problems. Let me display another chart you'll find incredibly difficult to accept. The 10 most penalized drivers regarding super license penalty points since 2014 consists entirely of non-United Kingdom drivers. I don't believe anyone could fault Verstappen's observations about lacking the appropriate passport for this sport. Evidence speaks more convincingly than arguments. I'm also not attempting to attack British drivers here. This simply compares the FIA's treatment of them versus other competitors. Russell and Norris bear no responsibility for not receiving deserved penalties. You might assume this provides sufficient controversy to conclude the FIA's weekend, right? Unfortunately, you'd be mistaken. Let's examine how officials handled the Tsunoda-Piastri situation during Free Practice 3. Piastri contacted the barrier and sustained a rear tire failure during the session's final moments. Consequently, he operated a compromised vehicle on track, similar to what earned Pérez a 3-position grid penalty for Barcelona's upcoming race last year. Naturally, these incidents differed, and Pérez's vehicle appeared more severely damaged, but this concerns rule enforcement. Yuki Tsunoda overtook Piastri along the main straight, mainly because the Australian driver had moved off the racing line while struggling toward the pit entrance, and this action resulted in the Red Bull driver receiving a 10-position grid penalty for the race. This ranks among the most severe, possibly the harshest punishment Tsunoda could have faced, despite performing nothing unsporting or dangerous toward other grid members. Actually, remaining behind Piastri would have risked damaging his vehicle from possible debris falling from the McLaren. So, how do you punish Tsunoda for attempting to protect his car and fellow drivers while not penalizing Piastri for struggling across the entire circuit back to the pit entrance? This defies logic, and Tsunoda expressed bewilderment that no drivers ahead received penalties for the safety car violation occurring after the session ended. The situations were remarkably comparable. Both sessions had concluded. Officials still issued cautionary warnings to the entire grid, but the crucial difference involved Tsunoda overtaking during red flag circumstances. I'd understand if this occurred through significantly different risky methods. Tsunoda proceeded extremely cautiously and prevented potential problems. It's truly that straightforward, yet the FIA refused considering anything Red Bull presented to them. Conversely, Russell's explanation about his braking technique intended to pressure Verstappen into briefly advancing past car 63 received thorough consideration from the stewards. I don't believe this benefits the sport whatsoever. Rather, it damages the heritage and credibility already fragmented beyond repair. This provides another example why leadership changes might be necessary sooner than anticipated, since eventually Ben Sulayem must face challenges to his authority. Considering all these factors, what are your thoughts regarding the FIA's inconsistencies during the Canadian Grand Prix, and more significantly, do you believe lacking United Kingdom citizenship disadvantages other grid drivers? Share your opinions in the comment section below, and afterward, ensure you select the video currently displayed on your screen.